YouTube, what's going on? Today we're looking at web components, and the biggest place to look for web components is YouTube itself. So if we go into the console, we can see that a web component alone is, I guess you would say in a sense, a template for data that you can display to any page. And there's a whole movement going on with web components. It seems to be the future of web programming. The best way to get a sense of what they do is to see how they're actually used. So if we're on YouTube here, we can come to the body, which is the whole page itself, all the content, and we can look for inside on this tag, it says YTD-app. Now that's not something you can casually use with regular programming. That's what's called a web component that's actually been made by YouTube to display all of their information. So the best way to pick out web components in a site is if it has a dash in it. All normal tags that come with programming itself doesn't have dashes in it, where most web components that are custom made do have dashes in them. Just to better kind of clarify that, hey, this is a web component that we custom made. So if we go into their app here, we can see that there's so many web components. YouTube is almost entirely comprised of web components. Now, these are all setup ones for different navigation managers and different managers that kind of make the site work how it does. But if we come down to this div, that's pretty much the main content. And the other part you could see is when we're on the page, it shows up here, it'll make it blue. So there's different parts that doesn't seem to show up right when there we go. These blue parts are when we highlight over something, it says this is what we're showing. And it's just a simple way to see in the kind of console manager here what's going on. So because I was highlighting over that stuff, it pulled up different parts that we haven't gotten to yet. But if we come back to where we were in this div that has content, that's the main page, everything that's in it, we come down to, let's see, next that pulls up is this TPYT app drawer. That seems to be most of the content that's displayed to the screen. Let's scroll down a little. Actually, let's pull this down so we can see what we're looking at here. And then we come back up, because then again, it changed based on what I was hovering over before. And let's see, we want div content. We want the app drawer. Here we go. This is where we were. And we come down to, oh, I'm sorry, it wasn't the app drawer. It was the general browse here. We come here, if we're going through, we can see in the general browse, there's this 2-column browse results rendered. So that's another web component they made. And inside of that web component, we come down, oh, sorry, we're already inside that one. But inside that web component, we come down to primary, which has pretty much all the content that they display to your screen, where secondary is kind of the backup stuff that isn't necessarily rendered right away. So we come to primary, that's already on the screen. And then since there's so many web components, its scrolling goes pretty quick because it's an entirely long page that makes an entire website. So we come down to this rich grid renderer, and we see this is the header information. So we want to, sorry. So this is the header information. We want to close that because we're not really worried about that right now. Our debugger popped up. That's great. And then we come down, here we go, we have contents again. That's opened up to even more custom web components that YouTube has made. We have another one that says content here, but we're not looking for this part. We're looking for the main area that gets rendered. Which, as you can see, there are what looks to be hundreds of parts that are rendered. So here, if we go over here, we can see that it hovers over that main content that we want to look at. We keep going down. We see another div tag that says content. We go into that, and here we're narrowing it down a little more. Take some time to go through these pages because there's just so much content, and YouTube is made, as I've said before, entirely of web components, and it's a really good look at what's going on here. So this div is containing that header at the top that kind of gives recommendations, and then this is the actual contents of the page for each video. And what we see here is it highlights the first video on the left here, and then the second, and then the third as you go through, and all of these are web components. And that's what leads us to the great thing about web components and why the website world is slowly transitioning towards them. Now, to develop this normally on a website, you'd have to spend, say, I don't know, a day or two on each video to write all of the code that goes into displaying this one, and then this one, and then this one. And then if you use a table, it's a whole nother world of trying to format everything right. Or if you use flexboxes, it takes a whole much more time just to figure out where everything should go. Now, the great thing about these web components is, look, these are all the exact same thing. YTD rich item renderer, YTD rich item renderer for every single one. And just looking at these four alone, they're the same thing, but they all have different videos in them. So why that is because you can have a web component, but you can have customizable parts to it. So when you have the same thing every time, you can put in all these web components, but you can customize which video goes here, what video goes in this web component. So these are all made by the same outline, the same template, but inside of that web component itself, they're customized so that a different video displays in each one based on what we're looking at. So this one's a video about India setting new devastating COVID-19 record. And this one's also about COVID-19, 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 because I guess that's the most popular ones going right now. But they're all different videos using the same web component. This saves time for programmers. This saves a lot of time rendering because it's a lot easier to load in a compressed amount of content because we know exactly what we need where. Whereas if you were making a separate one for each different video, you might be using more code than you would if you had a defined structure for it. So that's the great thing about web components. There's so many other websites out there that use them. In this case, there's also EA Games. If we take a quick look at their website, we can look for the dash in between words. It's custom styles. So these are all the styles for their site. We can look EA local nav. That kind of brings up this whole nav bar here. You can see even as I hover over it, at the bottom here, we get tens of hundreds more web components, different containers. And when you structure a website like this, it makes it a lot easier because, as we said before, using the same web component for different parts saves a lot of time programming, a lot of money is saved because there's not as much time used to make all these to make each individual part, but to rather use the same thing for each different section of the page. Thanks for watching. I hope you learned a little more about web components. I'll see you next time.